Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. Hi, it's Jonathan Goldhill, and welcome to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. And today's guest she's probably going to be my favorite guest so far, because this woman would be in the Hall of Fame of family businesses. And let me tell you why. Meet Mitzi Perdue. She is the daughter of one family business titan and the widow of another. So her father founded the Sheraton Hotel Chain, and that business dates back to 1840. And her late husband was the family business poultry magnate, otherwise known as Frank Perdue. I grew up on this man, watching him on TV commercials. He had some of the funniest television commercials you could imagine for a chicken business. But she's also a businesswoman in her own right. And we're going to learn a lot from her today, because we're going to learn what two different family businesses or how two different family businesses dealt with succession. So a little bit more about Mitzi. So she's got the experience of these two family businesses, which gives her more than a 275 years of family business experience. She started her family's wine grape business, now one of the larger suppliers of wine grapes in California. She also was a rice farmer in California, and she likes nothing better than to share insider tips for successful family businesses. But before I finish her bio, you have to know this woman is also an author, and she's written 5 really amazing books. One called How to Make Your Family Business Last, another How to Communicate Values to Children So They Love It, and Tough Man and Tender Chicken, Business and Life Lessons from Frank Perdue. I didn't bargain for this, and How to Be Up in Down Times, 40 tips that she co-authored with Mark Victor Hansen. So Mitzi, wow, what a bio. Welcome to my podcast.
Oh, what a joy to be with you. And I love the idea of talking about succession, because I got to watch it up close and personal in 2 cases.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about your family business, the history of maybe each of them, and then let's get into succession and talk about that.
Okay, briefly about my father. In the 1930s, at the height of the Great Depression, and everybody was running away from real estate, he started the hotel chain. And at the time of his death, he employed 20,000 people, and the family owned 400 hotels. That's my family of origin side.
And now correct me, because I said earlier that it started in 1840. So back up.
No, you're absolutely right.
Back up and
the Sheraton Hotel started in the 1930s, but the Henderson Estate Company, which this was part of, began in 1840.
Okay, and so is that the equivalent of a modern day family office?
I guess you might call it that, because today it is a family office. When it started, it was just a real estate company. And then it grew and went in different directions. And then my father enlarged it no end by starting the Sheraton Hotel Chain.
So did it have different agricultural real estate interests, or was it, what was it that they were involved in? Just give us a real quick sketch.
Well, in the 1840s, it was real estate, but then it moved off into weird, strange directions like tire companies, artificial rubber, subway systems, ostrich feathers. So they've been in a whole lot of things.
Wow.
But and now we're still in a whole lot of things, but not hotels anymore.
I bet. Okay. So the business started in the Depression, which is quite an amazing accomplishment in and of itself. And it grew under your father's leadership, most of that next.
Well, he started with one hotel and made a success of that. And at the end of his life, as I said, 400 hotels. So, he knew what he was doing.
So your brother is now running this business, or no? He got
no. In the case of the Sheraton Hotels, we sold the whole thing when my father died.
Right.
Which, by the way, made succession a very easy question, because we sold it.
But was there someone who wanted to be a successor in that business?
That answer's a little bit complicated because my older brother could have, but it became, for financial reasons, it was just a really good idea if you were a hotel company back in 1967. A lot of the hotels were in inner cities, and they needed, if they were to remain competitive, they'd need just an enormous infusion of cash. And that's why a lot of hotel companies back then did partner, like with car companies. And so we were bought out by, voluntarily, it was a good deal for us. We were bought out by ITT.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So tell us about the other business and what was that experience like? Because that business is still being run by a family member.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. The Perdue Company, it's been in business since 1920, which means this is our 100th year anniversary. There is a third gen who's running it. And there's actually a bunch of fourth gens in the wings.
Wow.
See if I can count. I think there are 4 who would be totally qualified to run it. And how that shakes out, the future will tell.
Interesting. So now Frank was the second gen, and I know you and he weren't married probably when he got into the business, but can you tell us a little bit about the history of how he got into the business? Did he start as a kid in the business? Did he grow up in the business? And, how was that torch passed down to him?
Okay. His father started it in 1920, the year that Frank was born. So Frank absolutely grew up in the chicken industry. I mean, he used to say that I've been in it when I was so small, I'd hold an egg with 2 hands. But it was one of his father was like one of 5,000 farmers in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, or in the Delmarva Peninsula of Maryland. So one of 5,000. Frank joined the company officially when he was 20. I mean, he had been working in it all along, but he went to college and then decided that he didn't really like college. And so he went back to work for his father full time while he figured out what he really wanted to do in life, and never left.
Okay, so now I have to interrupt to ask you, as a special favor for people who are watching this, if you will stand up so people can see the shirt, and back up just a little bit so they can see his face, because this was an iconic face. This was right out of television, folks. If you didn't grow up with this, then you didn't grow up on the East Coast and watch TV like I did. Thank you, Mitzi. That's great. So his dad prepared the business for him in some way for Frank to take over. And I mean, do you know much about that transition? Was it?
Yeah, I know a lot because I actually wrote a book about it.
Okay.
There was a biography of his father called A Solid Foundation. And for Frank's 75th anniversary do I mean that? Maybe it was his 50th, working with the company, and it was his 50th. I wrote a book called Building on a Solid Foundation. And that was more of the history of the company. And Frank and his father Frank would always say, my father was the best friend I ever had.
Oh, wow.
He said they never quarreled. They just got along beautifully. But his father, as far as I can tell, was made really uneasy by the pace at which Frank wanted to grow, because Frank wanted to take out loans. His father had never taken out a loan in his life. His motto was, if you don't owe money, you can't go bankrupt.
Right.
And, Frank was, they got along so well, but they were opposite personalities.
Tell us more about that. What was Frank like? So normally most people think of the entrepreneur founder as hard driving, and then the next gen as someone who's just going to manage what is already in place. But as you know, the concept of my book is about disruptive successors, where the next gen leader really wants to, go to a whole new level, and it puts stress and strain sometimes on the relationship between
I think in most cases I would predict stress and strain. And yet again, I wrote a book on this. I interviewed a great many people, more than 100. And again, every indication is that somehow these 2 men just got each other. And it was probably scary we call him Mr. Arthur. That's Arthur's father. That's Frank's father. For Mr. Arthur, it must have just been deeply upsetting to somebody who pretty much like never left the eastern shore of Maryland and lived in a small farm, to have his son, who became like a national icon. I mean, there was a period when he was known as the marketing icon of America. We're talking the 1980s.
He was. I mean, he was, no question about it. And so he had to earn the confidence of his dad to be able to, make those investments and borrow money and, leverage the business. Did he?
Well, there came a point where if he was going to grow from just growing chickens to how about providing feed for the chickens, or eventually having other people grow for Perdue.
Right.
And that meant enlarging facilities. And there came a day where he wanted his father to co-sign a loan. And I don't remember how much it was, but let's say it's $250,000.
Mm-hmm.
And his father's looking at this and thinking, what? And Frank said that it was just one of the more moving things in his life when his father did sign it, given that his father's lifelong approach to everything was don't borrow.
Well, so he really was a disruptor in that business. I did a little background, either reading or watching a video of yours where, Frank was described as kind of a shy man, and to make him the face of the brand and put him on television was a big move. And it made him really a household name, I think, and face. So.
Yeah, he actually, this may be surprising, but he resisted being on television as hard as he could, because he said, I've never been in a school play. I don't enjoy public speaking. I'm the wrong person for this. But he did it because the copywriter said, you're breaking ground. You're advertising a commodity. People don't advertise commodities because you might sell chickens for everybody, but you're not going to sell your chickens. He said the copywriter told Frank, the only way we can differentiate chickens from as a commodity is you have to go on, because your competitors, your competitors can say my chicken is fresh or my chicken is healthy or whatever, but the one thing that they can't imitate is you, because you look like a chicken and you squawk like a chicken. And Frank went along with it.
Well, that's pretty funny, actually, because there's some truth to that. But we're not going to go into that part of this conversation.
Frank was perfectly aware that he resembled a chicken, and he played off of it. And he had a huge sense of humor, and he was very self-deprecating. And
he had a passion, I bet, that drove him in the business and drove him like an entrepreneur drives, because he worked in this business, I guess, up until the day he died, and he loved what he did. Is that right?
I'm trying to think how to express that. I think you're understating it.
Okay. He was but he was a tough man. So tell us a little bit about some of his, I know you wrote this book 5 years ago or longer. What were some of the tough parts of running that business for him? And I mean, was he tough with his children? Because he has now, there's the third gen and the fourth gen are in there, but the third gen is running the company. So tell us a little bit about that toughness and how that translated into business.
Okay, one of the things that I know he did is he wasn't just a chicken grower. He had 5,000 people who were growing chickens for him. He was also chicken processing plants. And I think probably like every couple of weeks, he'd send buyers out to the supermarkets wherever we sold chicken, and they would buy, the buyers who worked for Perdue would buy Perdue product, and they'd also buy our competitors' product. And then people, experts in quality in the company would get together and analyze, are we better in like 40 different parameters? And if they weren't, boy, the manager of the plant was going to hear from Frank personally, because he felt that, my name is on this, it has to be as good as we possibly can make it. And he didn't allow slippage on that. That was just all important to him.
Well, it just shows you that entrepreneurs are tough. And you have to be, because there's a lot of risk that you're taking, and there's a lot of lives that you're responsible for. But probably no life you're more responsible for than the life of your children, because you have the greatest impact on that. So tell us, he had more than one child, but he had one child go into the business. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, one son, three daughters.
Okay.
And the son was a perfect example of what you were alluding to earlier about how it's one personality that starts a company and another that keeps it going.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Perdue has such a different personality from his father. I mean, his father was just hard charging, and Jim, on the other hand, is a much more, I would say, rules and structure related personality. Like Jim has a master's in business administration, and one of the things that he's really good about is chain of command. One of the things Frank was really bad about was chain of command. I mean, if something bothered Frank, he didn't care who he told. If Jim has a problem with something, he'll mention it to somebody high up in the hierarchy who will tell it to the next person until it gets dealt with.
That's an interesting, and I've dealt with this conflict. Do you know how Jim dealt with this? Did he pull his dad aside and say, you have to speak to me, run everything through me, or did he scold his dad?
I think I'm the world's living authority on how this was handled, because it was incredibly hard for Frank. It just went against every fiber of his body, and so he knew that he should pull back and not try to run everything. But if something wasn't going the way he thought it should, it would drive him nuts. And Jim didn't want him undercutting the managers beneath him, which in effect you do, because if you break the chain of command, that's sort of showing lack of respect or lack of trust of the person whose job it should be to correct it.
Sure.
Okay, so it's an absolute great big conflict. Frank knowing what the right thing to do was and being 100% unable to execute. So here's how we handled it.
Yes, tell us, because we want to understand how conflict was handled in that family's business. Go for it.
Okay, I consider myself really, really close to my stepson, Jim Perdue. In fact, like I often hear from him, even today, and so we're close. Well, back then, and we're talking, oh golly, at least 20 years ago, maybe 23 years ago, back then, Jim would call me and he'd say, oh, this is so indiscreet, but here goes. He'd say, yeah, Dad's absolutely driving everybody nuts. Do something.
Okay.
And it's good that I was a discreet person and didn't tell Frank in an unkind way. But instead, I'd go up to Frank and I'd say, darling, I've always wanted to go to the South Pacific, and there's a cruise that leaves in 3 days, and I already got tickets.
Oh my gosh! So just take him out of commission. He could not get a hold of him.
I mean, I got to go on a lot of really wonderful cruises because
I hope he enjoyed them as well.
The only way to solve the problem was to have Frank out of the country.
Gotcha. So remove him from the situation. So that's an interesting way of dealing with conflict. Was Jim?
But it was really an immovable object and an irresistible force, because Frank, with all the goodwill in the world, with all the love for his son in the world, he could not do what he was supposed to do.
Gotcha.
And this worked. It worked.
And did it change over time as he got older? Was he able to say, I don't have the energy, just let Jim do it, or I'm tired, or did he just always have that, I got to go and handle this kind of an approach?
I put a lot of effort into trips. As he got older, I'm not sure that I could ever say that his energy diminished. But, okay, one thing that helped, and I don't recommend this for everybody else, was he got a little bit hard of hearing. And so that sort of a little bit removed him from doing what he knew was the right thing, but it was a case of, I know what to do, I can't do it.
Yes, I experienced that with my grandfather. He got hard of hearing as well. And I think at some points he just said, I'm not going to deal with this because he didn't know what was going on.
Yeah,
So,
and that, I hope I'm not being unfair. I mean, somebody else might take a different view of how it was. I mean, the bedrock was that the two men loved each other.
well, and they respected each other too. Yes. Yep. They respected each other too.
They adored each other. They respected each other. But anybody who's had a lifelong habit knows that changing a lifelong habit is hard to change, period.
Yep. So just talk to me a little bit about also communication in this family business, and maybe even, in the family of origins business. How would you characterize the communication in and amongst the leaders and managers? Like, it was open, it was closed, it was, things where there were secrets, there was transparency. I mean, give us a little bit of description of it.
All right. What I can talk about most authoritatively was how this was handled within the families, because I sometimes did get to watch my father, and I many times got to watch Frank, but I don't really know about communication in the business, but I can talk about it within the family. And communication within the family happens to be extraordinarily important because, as I'm sure our audience, most of them would be aware, or maybe not, but here it is. Here's a statistic. 70% of family businesses don't make it to the next generation.
Right.
And the biggest cause of that is family quarrels.
Yep. And do you think those quarrels are around money oftentimes, or is it power, or is it disagreements about little stuff? I mean, what's your experience in that area?
All right. My experience, because I grew up with a lot of peers and got to kind of look into their families. And then I also have the privilege of addressing a lot of family business conferences, and people confide in me, and I love it. But here's my impression. And it comes actually from a psychiatrist that I admire a lot, but he formulated what I'm about to describe. There's this guy, Dr. Youssef, and Dr. Youssef says quarrels are almost never about what they're about.
Correct.
He said they're almost always sort of leftovers from childhood disagreements.
Yeah, and I always say there's something else. Correct.
Yeah, that there's something else that they're almost never about what they're about. Well, so how do you? Well, first of all, let's stipulate that there doesn't exist a family that doesn't have quarrels. That's a fact of life. So how do you handle them, given that we're human beings and we're gonna fight? So here's how the Hendersons handled it. We had an agreement, which is that we could fight like cats and dogs, but we would never, as the family phrase for it was, we don't wash our dirty linen in public.
Yes.
So we could fight like cats and dogs among ourselves if we needed to. I mean, it wasn't encouraged, but the idea is if you just stuff a disagreement and don't deal with it, it'll get worse.
Well, and that's a big piece of Pat Lencioni's work in The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, where he talks in his model about the importance of having conflict. Conflict is good. Conflict is healthy, but it has to be productive conflict, and it has to be done with respect and with the intention to resolve and then commit to some kind of thing that you all agree to. It's not like, okay, now let's go back into our own camps, and you have to work through the conflict. So super important and, interesting to note.
And, this, I mean, I truly was brought up, since being in a high chair with the idea that you don't talk about family stuff outside the family. And phrased again as we don't wash our dirty linen in public. And this was really put to the test when the family was deciding whether to sell the Sheraton chain of hotels. And this was right after my father. And, when there's been a death in the family, feelings are like white hot, and just your whole universe, somebody's taking an egg beater to it. It was, and the I have two sisters and two brothers. The sisters and I didn't want to sell. The two brothers did want to sell. And when you have a fight that's over identity, which this was, because our identity was, I'm a hotel heiress. When you argue over something that truly deeply affects your identity, those are white hot arguments.
I bet.
And it would have been so easy for one of us to confide in one of our friends in the press, or maybe hire a lawyer to represent our point of view. We didn't do it.
So let's just digress for just a second, because I was talking to you earlier before this recording about some research I had read about success in relationships, in marriages in particular. And based on all this data that was collected from all these couples, the number one, or the first finding of successful marriages, was that they didn't air their laundry in public. And so let's clarify what this means, because it doesn't mean that they don't have a therapist or a facilitator, a mediator, a coach, a family business advisor, someone who's neutral that they bring into it, but they don't go spreading it indiscriminately or indiscreetly, I think was what indiscreetly around. They don't make a mess out of it. Keep it clean.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is, boy, if you need a family business counselor, get it as fast as you can, because the longer something festers, probably the worse it's going to get.
100%.
But I don't consider that going public, because, I mean, to me, the press is going public, or having a legal case is going public. But calling in the equivalent of a doctor to help with the relationship, please do that at the first sign of need. In fact, I would have a family business counselor even in advance of need, just so that you have somebody to fall back on. Because,
yep.
I mean, again, since 70% of family businesses don't make it, and the biggest reason for that is family quarrels, this is something to pay attention to fast.
Well, and I always tell people, and I talk about it in my book, that you should have a BOAT, a business owner advisory team. And that is the people that you surround yourself with that are like expert advisors. They're maybe on the board of directors, but probably with smaller family businesses. They're an informal advisory board, and they are your accountant, your attorney, because they're involved in both protecting and distributing the wealth. A wealth manager and insurance, because they're about compounding, growing it, and again, also protecting it. And I think a coach, an advisor who can drive value and create value in the business is also part of that team. So interesting. All right.
Actually, I'm the deepest believer in the world in coaches, because you don't know everything.
100%. And you don't know what you don't know. So, all right, let's talk a little bit more. What haven't we covered in some of the succession challenges and leadership transitions? A colleague of mine calls it the sticky baton syndrome. So we understand now Frank and Jim, and how it was kind of a sticky baton. Frank had trouble letting go, and Jim was grasping it.
By the way, may I quickly add that none of this ever interfered with their love for each other. Yeah. It was just a habit thing. And I think Jim deeply understood that his father couldn't. And Frank recognized that he had this defect that he couldn't break a habit. So it was a sticky problem, but it wasn't a hateful problem.
Understood. Now, so someone who's been involved in more than one family, multi-generational business, I'm sure you've been exposed to the concepts of a family constitution, the idea of having family values that are separate from the business. Talk a little bit about that and your experience in your family's businesses. Did they have any of these types of instruments? How did they
It's so interesting to be up close and personal with two big, long-lasting families. And I compare the difference between the Hendersons and the Perdues to the Brits and the Americans. The Brit legal system, they don't have a constitution. They have just an endless series of precedents that pretty much have the effect of law. Mm-hmm. But they don't have like a written constitution.
Right.
And that's the Hendersons. We don't have a written constitution, but we we do fall back on how we do things. And somehow it all works. It's been going on so long that we just roll with it, and it works. On the other hand, the Perdues are more like the Americans. The Perdues, I would say they're much more formalized in decision making. We have the equivalent of a constitution. We have it's spelled out. Certain decisions can be made by the bloodline. Other decisions can be made by everybody. Some decisions are made, it has to be a consensus. Others, it can be a majority. Some, it's a supermajority. It's all spelled out. And the good thing is, as these things were being hammered out, and it took years to get there, people signed on to them, they argued about them, but finally they agreed. And if you have an agreed on structure, this is how it's done, that solves a whole lot of problems for any institution.
So tell us a little more background, like how long did they know it was a problem before they put these things into place? And how long did it take to put into place? And did you have to use outside experts, advisors to help you?
Well, the very good thing is we have had outside advisors at least since 1988. Mm-hmm. And it was outside advisors. I'm talking Perdue's now. It's mm-hmm. outside advisors who recommended that we do this to forestall problems, and how right they were. And as for how long it took, I would say that it evolves. Like, I have an email from the head of the family council saying that they're revisiting decisions that were made in 88 to see, is this still working? Is this still good for us? Right. So it's a living document, but it's a long-term document.
Right, because otherwise things can get stuck in a time frame, maybe it becomes too bureaucratic, the organization, and you can't make a decision without consulting the rule book first. But look, these are good guardrails to put up in a business, and they probably make for a successful business. And so I want to digress for a second, because I'm really interested in this book, at least the title of it, which is How to Communicate Values to Children So They'll Love It. And so what I want to digress about is, it seems to me that, there's many books that we can read about how to have and build a successful business, but there are very few books on how to have and build a successful family. And you wrote a book that suggests that maybe by communicating values to children so they'll love it early on, is in the vein of, let's build a successful family here, that the family can be proud of, that there's legacy. And so I want to talk a little bit with you about that. Where did this idea come from? And let's start with, where did this idea come from to write this book?
Well, I spend a lot of time studying what makes a family business successful. And we have a saying in the Perdue family, happy family, happy business. And you don't want an unhappy family, because that means an unhappy business. So, as somebody who's interested in persuasion and culture, how do you embed that? And all the reading that I did everywhere I can get my little grubby mitts on, they always said, the younger you instill the values, the deeper they are. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, where's a book I can read on get them while they're young? How do you do it? I couldn't find any.
There's no book on that subject.
I decided to write one myself, and I based it on, actually, I wrote the book as I was doing some of the things in the book. And the idea is, for instilling values, to start with, if you're still a nuclear family, the more time you spend with your kids, like if you have 5 or more meals in the course of a week with your kids, that's so protective from the kids against things like substance abuse or being in trouble with the law, yes. Even weight issues.
Yes.
If you have 1 or fewer meals in the course of a week with your kids, they're just much more at risk for a whole lot of things that keep the family from being high functioning. So first thing is, if you're first generation, spend a lot of time with your kids. Have time on great vacations, and great can mean a staycation, but just time when you relish being a family together. But supposing you're like 3rd generation and you're geographically dispersed, Well,
So I bet you have a treasure chest of ideas behind you. So tell us about what's in your treasure chest.
well,
Oh, look at that. You have an actual treasure chest.
this is my actual treasure
Oh
chest.
my gosh.
And
What
and
goes
here's what
into
it's
that?
about.
Yes.
At least 4 times a year, at least when there are kids between 4 and 12,
Mm-hmm.
when they're young kids and we want to instill the family values or values that will help make the family strong and successful,
Mm-hmm.
I do it in the form of stories in the newsletter. And to explain this, I'm going to give a sample newsletter.
Okay.
And the one I'm going to describe happens to be the one that I've got the treasure chest that goes with
Okay,
it.
now good. But so this sounds like another thing that owners have to do or entrepreneurs have to do. Like, who does this? Is this someone who's head of HR? But like,
Never, no. It's there ought to be some family member who will do it because
so yeah. So it's a voluntary family member that does it because they're are they a historian of the family business? Are they in that same person or like, yeah, who does this? And I guess you've been doing it.
I've been doing it for both families. However, in both families, when I go to my great reward, which I hope is a long time from now, but
Right.
in both families, there are people who've stepped up to be like assistant matriarch.
Okay, awesome. So you have a successor already. You have successors picked out.
Totally. Not only that, but like, how about they do practice things for it? But for
Great.
the newsletter, and you know, a little side comment responding to what you said about it's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to ask you and members of our audience to search your soul and see if I'm right about this. The greatest pains and the greatest pleasures in life are going to come from your intimate relationships.
100% agree.
Okay, so tending those relationships are about as important as it gets.
Yes.
So this is worth doing. First of all, it's kind of fun, but second of all, the rewards are beyond measure. Because families that are doing badly, I bet dozens of people tell me that when a relationship is going badly, it permeates every hour of every day.
It sure does. All right. So tell us
Okay,
what's in
so
that
let's
treasure
prevent
chest.
that by teaching kids some values. And so in the newsletters, every newsletter is built around a value, and I will give you a sample one.
Okay. Give me.
In both families, we really believe in being frugal. You get your identity by doing good works, not by the labels that you wear.
Wow, that's interesting. Frugal, because I always tell people that one of the mistakes entrepreneurs make is you can't save your way to success. So let's see. Okay.
Well, by the way, I'm hugely in favor of spending money on experiences like a neat vacation or something.
Right.
But I'm hugely not in favor of spending a lot on labels, because what does that do for you other than distort your whole value field? But I don't want to be critical of anybody else. Every family can find its own way, but in both families, we travel economy class. I use public transportation, subways and buses, and so did Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we are a frugal family.
Right.
So how do you communicate that to kids? To be proud of being frugal.
Well, you can tell me.
All right. Well, they're certainly going to get it from the role models of the grown-ups in their lives.
Right.
But here's what I did. In one of the newsletters, I told the story of Mommy Do, great-grandmother, and what she was like. And it's all written in simple, short sentences with a font of like 22 instead of a normal 12. Something that a young kid can read.
Right.
Although if they're very young, their grown-up will read it to them. But I tell how Mommy Do loved to have her family over. And when she was having her family over, she'd make her famous biscuits. But after she had made her biscuits, each of the biscuits were on a baking sheet that was covered with aluminum foil. So she'd remove the biscuits from the aluminum foil, then she'd brush off the crumbs, wash the aluminum foil, and reuse it. Because we're a frugal family, we're environmental, we don't waste. And okay, so that story, I think it's got to influence them. It sort of has to set their mind of this is who we are. But to make it sink in even deeper, every newsletter is accompanied by a treasure chest that has gifts in it. And this particular one that illustrates the aluminum foil and mummy do, it has, what I'm holding up here is biscuit mix.
Yep.
The kids get to make Mummy Do's biscuits. There's also aluminum foil so that they can cover the baking sheet.
Right.
And after they bake the biscuits, wash it off and reuse it. But to make it even more fun for the kids, because that kids just love costumes. And I don't know if this is going to show or not. Wish me luck.
Okay, let's see what you've got.
Well, I have every kid, and sometimes there would be like 20 of these being sent out. Every kid would get a baking hat. Can you see it?
Yes, I can, of course. Yep.
And also an envelope that would go with it. So the kids get for an hour, all the activities are an hour or more or less.
Right.
And so they get to talk with their grown-up about a fun activity. They get to eat the biscuits and they get to dress up, which they love. And that's what the book, How to Communicate Values to Your Children,
I love it.
So they'll love it, is about.
I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a bunch of newsletters where you can fill in the blanks that would apply to your family. And then there's activities that take an hour and places where you can go to for like the costumes or the ingredients. And it's almost always Amazon.
Mm-hmm. So I love it. I think it's really creative and it emphasizes the points that you need to teach the communication. You need to teach your children well so that if they come into the family business, that they'll embrace the same values that you have, and their styles might be different, their knowledge is going to be different, their understanding and application of technology, and all things that maybe push the envelope of the older generation. It's one thing, but they do it with the same value set. So that's really powerful. Mitzi, thanks so much for sharing that. So I think that one of the important values that I know exists in your family and exists in my family, and that's the concept of philanthropy and stewardship. And so I'd love to understand a little bit more about your philosophy around that. I've always called it a noblesse oblige, which is the obligation of the nobility or the haves to do things for the have-nots. But tell us a little bit about your experience with philanthropy and stewardship, and then we're going to talk about the thing that you're most excited about these days. But let's start with first the basics. Why is philanthropy and stewardship?
Why philanthropy?
And let me just add that one of the things that I've done to teach this concept to my clients is I make it really clear when they become a client of mine that 5% of the coaching fees that they pay me each year will be donated to a domestic charity of their choice. And I encourage them to pick a charity that's in their community that maybe is something that connects with them personally or their business, because I think it's an extension of their brand, and it's certainly an extension of my brand. And so that's the one way that I communicate that, because I think it's really important. But tell us a little bit about your connection to all this stuff.
Okay, briefly, I was brought up with the idea, I can remember Mother telling me this 100 times, and telling my siblings as well, that we're here to put back in the bucket. And is that obvious what that means? It means, you've been given a lot, put back. And I remember once I'm not sure how old I was, but maybe 8 or 10 or something. And I come into my father's study and it's a Saturday and he's just surrounded with all these books and papers and things. And I ask him what he's doing. And he explains that he's evaluating charities that he's going to support. And I said, why are you doing that? You could be out playing golf or something. And he said words that I'll just absolutely never forget and that have influenced me the rest of my life, and that I think I've seen apply to Frank Perdue as well. And it's this: He said, the greatest pleasure my money has ever given me is in giving it away.
Wow.
Is that not powerful?
Yeah, it's so powerful. And
I'll tell you how Frank Perdue.
it must be that must be so challenging as a thought to young entrepreneurs that I know that are busy trying to make their first, they're trying to break $1 million in revenue, or and they're maybe focused on, focusing on money as a goal is a really bad goal.
Actually, I'm in favor of, I'm going to get biblical on you. There's a time and a season.
Yes.
And the time when you're building your company isn't the time to give a lot of it away.
Correct.
But by the time I was 8, Father had, a bunch of hotels and he was doing well. So, he actually.
Let me add to that though. So the time and the season. So it's not about giving it away when you're younger and trying to build something, but it's not about focusing on the money, because I know that that's a mistake. I've been there. I've tried to focus on the money. It's about focusing on impact or difference, or, I don't think Frank was focused on like making an extra dollar. He was probably focused on how did he get his chickens into, the hands and mouths of more people? How could he feed more people? It's about impact and difference. And so that otherwise, money is just a thing. It's just it's not the right measure.
I have a personal motto, which is success is not measured by what you can get, but by what you can give.
Yeah.
And you aren't going to have a lot to give until you've gotten. So I'm all in favor of getting.
Right.
I also want to share what Frank told his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He had something called an ethical will. And number 7 in his ethical will was, out of 10, was, if you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. If you want to be miserable, think what's owed to you.
Yeah, good point. All right. So I know you're involved in combating human trafficking, and I know a little bit about this because I've been donating to a cause for 5 years every year that is trying to stop sex trafficking. I know Tony Robbins is all in on this as well. Tell us a little bit about the organization that you've created and or invested in, and what that's all about.
All right. About a year and a half ago, the words human trafficking didn't mean anything. They just sort of glide by. But then I saw or heard a lecture in which this guy told about little girls, 10 and 12 years old, who were forced to have sex 10 or 12 times a night, 365 days a year, and their life expectancy was less than 7 years because they were going to commit suicide or overdose or be murdered for their organs. And I thought, this is the most horrible thing I've ever heard about in my entire life, and I would like to spend the rest of my life doing something about it. But what can I what could I do about it? Because I don't have the skills to rescue children or rehabilitate them. So I started thinking, what could I do? And I have a couple of approaches. And this is after talking with at least 60 different anti-trafficking organizations about what is needed. What they all need is more awareness of the problem. They also need more funds. So Win This Fight is about fundraising for other organizations. And it's also about raising awareness. And the fundraising, the initial plan was to give away very high value items in a giant auction to raise $100 million. Wow. And we were on track to do it. Like, the best donation that came in was a 69.7 carat ruby that belonged to a Qing dynasty emperor. I mean, that alone might bring $60 million.
Wow.
And by the way, in case 69.7 carats doesn't resonate with you, if you can see my ring here.
Yes.
That's 5 carats.
Yes, I'm thinking it's about the size of your fist, the 69 carats.
Well, in actual fact, because I've held the darn thing.
Yeah.
It's to the best of my ability to estimate, it's 10% smaller than a golf ball.
Wow, that's amazing.
Well, so a whole lot of just amazing gifts have come in, but it all got put on hold because of COVID-19, because the auction house said, when the economy's a little bit shaky and the geopolitical system has people worried, the ultra wealthy people who will bid on these things, they're not going to bid the prices up real high, and you might get, it could happen that you get 10 cents on the dollar.
We don't want
so that's
that.
On hold.
But I like that you had a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal, a big number.
So now I've got another.
Yes? Okay, what is it?
What keeps trafficking going? It's a $150 billion a year industry.
Wow.
And the reason people do it is because the profits are obscene. If you're in New York and you have 4 girls in your stable, you're probably bringing in $1 million a year, and that's tax-free.
My gosh.
So you're doing it. It's incredible suffering, but your odds of doing jail time are less than 1 in 100. And by the way, that's global. In the world, if you're trafficking, you probably aren't going to do there's no deterrent for it. There's,
Wow.
In general, there's no deterrent, and they're obscene profits.
And it does exist in our country today.
On a phenomenal scale.
Not just something that exists in other countries. You're saying like that's a real situation that's happening in New York.
New York, by some standards, is the sex trafficking capital of the world.
Oh my gosh.
And you might wonder why, but the answer is because it goes where the money is.
Yep. Unbelievable.
But it also goes to little towns. So how do you attack? What do you do to get at the root of human trafficking? Fortunately, there's a group. It's called the International Fraud Group. And it's in 46 different countries. And these are people who know how to use the dark web and artificial intelligence and covert operations. And they can trace bank accounts through fraud accounts. Supposing you've got one in Liechtenstein or the Cayman Islands or something that's a shadow, and behind that's another one, and behind that's another one. They have the ability to trace all those things. They also have the ability to freeze the accounts and make it unprofitable for the traffickers. But you might say, if this solution exists, why hasn't it been done? Well, it hasn't been done because if you have those skills, you're probably making $250,000 a year, and you're probably are highly paid by all sorts of people who want your services. And you can't do it for free. You can't do it as a volunteer because you've got a mortgage and 2 kids who are going to college. You can't do it free. So there needs to be an entity to fund them all. And I have the huge privilege, say a prayer for me, because I don't know if this will happen or not, but the negotiations are well on their way between one of the largest financial institutions in the world, and it's got to be in the top 2 or 3 largest anti-trafficking organizations in the United States. And I'd say their names, but since it hasn't gelled yet.
Yep. Okay.
But the amount of time that I spend talking with Hong Kong or Mongolia or Singapore or London is endless. But I'm hoping within the next couple of months that we will have an organization that can really attract the root of human trafficking, which is the profitability of it.
Oh my God, what an insidious business that these people are in. And we can see why you and others like you are passionate about ending it. So what is the organization that people might follow and
you asked that.
Support you in this cause?
All right. I would love it if they would come to winthisfight.org.
Okay, winthisfight.org. All right.
Yes, and I would particularly love them to be part of something that's going to happen in January. January is National Human Trafficking Awareness Month.
Okay.
And I'm so excited because, there's the number of people who are signing on to this is just crazy. But we're going to have a contest. And you can find out about it if you go to winthisfight.org. And contact me. You can contact me through the website.
Yep.
Winthisfight.org.
Winthisfight.org. Awesome. So fantastic. Okay,
what we're having is, for awareness, we're having a Win This Fight. I'm dressing up right now as Rosie the Riveter.
Okay, look
And
at you.
can you see the muscle I'm making?
I can. Yep, you look like her. I think most people in this group won't even know who Rosie the Riveter is. So appreciate the
Okay, but
reference.
I'll explain who she was. 75
Yep.
years ago,
Yep.
She was a woman who, or she was a symbol of a whole lot of
Yes.
American women who were part of the war effort and then go to factories. And
Yep.
a lot of people say they helped win the war. Well, Rosie the Liberator is, and I explained this on the website, but Rosie the Riveter, this is a modern day, a 21st century version of her. It's Rosie the Liberator. And if you come to my website, I'll explain how to join the contest.
Fantastic. Now, if people want to learn more about you, watch some of your many podcasts, they can go and also look at your books, MitziPerdue.com. Is that right?
That's
and
it.
That's Mitzi with an I and Perdue, Perdue. So fantastic. Well, folks, you've been listening to a couple of people that may not look like spring chickens, but we're pretty smart cookies here. And I think there's a lot of wisdom right here. The importance of connecting philanthropy and stewardship to your business at some point in time. First of all, the importance of having and being connected to a cause. It will not only drive you and your business, I think, but it drives your employees because they feel connected to something larger. And it's really important that if you're building a business, that the purpose of it be so purposeful that it's almost cause oriented. You're on a mission to change the world. You're on a mission to impact, and make a massive difference. And I think ultimately that's what is important and why I love entrepreneurship. And to go the full circle, it's about giving back at the end. So, Mitzi, this has been a fabulous conversation. I love that outfit with your, folks, you have to see this Rosie the Riveter look on her. And we're going to stay tuned and see how things are progressing in your business. So I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. Are there any final words you'd like to share?
Go to winthisfight.org.
Winthisfight.org, folks. Yes.
Hey, can we metaphorically, I don't want you actually to do this, but erase that tape because I got to share something with you. I have a voice coach and she says, speak with authority. So please come to winthisfight.org.
Yes. Do you notice how she just dropped her voice and made it so it didn't go up at the end, so it makes it sound more confident? So fantastic. All right. So this is Jonathan Goldhill signing off of another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. And if you like this show, please listen and subscribe and share this with your friends. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.